Hey, welcome to Whispers at Night. If you need a calm mind, a gentle scare, or a friend for sleepless hours, you're in the right place. Here you'll find spooky tales told softly, with the hush of rain in the background. Subscribe, join the family, and tap like if this helps you drift off. Thanks for being here. Now, let's begin. My name is Keaton Vale, 34, architect out of Atlanta. If you're reading this, I left these pages where someone might actually find them. I started a 10-day solo section on the Pinhoti through the Chiaja Wilderness on September 20th, 2021, Adams Gap, north past Chiaja and out near Bald Rock. I came to quiet the noise of a divorce and a job that disappeared. I've always trusted the woods to reset the dial. The first 3 days were what I'd hoped for. Air in the 70s, nights cool, oaks hinting at color. 12 miles a day, steady. A father and son passed me heading south. We traded weather and smiled like we knew something other people didn't. On day 4, heavy clouds stacked over the ridge and I stopped 3 miles shy of Chiaja, a small clearing with a stream at my back so at least one side was defended by water. There were footprints in the clearing that weren't mine. Human, barefoot or wrapped so soft the tread erased itself, longer than my own by a good inch. They circled the clearing in tight loops, 2, 3 times, as if someone had studied the place and left. Fresh enough that the heels still kept their edges. I set my tent dead center with the vestibule toward the open and my knife where muscle memory could find it. I told myself stories about local eccentrics who hike without shoes because telling a story is the first way to keep a night safe. I woke after midnight to whispering, more than one voice, too far to carry words but close enough for the shape of them to press through the trees. The cadence rode low in the throat, a guttural scrape under breath. Every few minutes, the sound shifted to a new bearing and settled again, as if the speakers took turns trading angles on my tent. No closer, no farther. I lay still, counting breaths until dawn made the nylon gray. Outside, fresh prints ringed the tent, at least 3 distinct sizes. One set came within 5 feet of where my head had been. I packed with hands that didn't agree to be hands and moved north, promising myself cell service and other people. At a scenic rock, I sat and didn't move. No crumbs, no noise, just waiting. 10 minutes into my test, a figure slid through timber 200 yards to my right, parallel to the trail, tall and wrapped in something pale, hide or ragged cloth. It moved in a way that made no sense in thick forest. Silent, not careful like a beginner, but practiced like someone who knows where weight goes to disappear. I cut east toward the nearest forest road. Even before the light began to thin, I knew it wasn't one person. Multiple sets of prints appeared on dust patches, some ahead, some where I'd swear I had already stepped. Branch tips twitched in sync on both sides of the trail the way fish turn together in water. My phone showed no service. The sky dimmed earlier than it should have. I set camp by a stream again, back to the water. Boots unlaced but ready. Headlamp and knife within reach. The voices returned, closer, and there were more of them, 6 or 7 at least, moving around me in an irregular ring. Their language, if it was one, folded clicks into whispers, like someone saying yes without letters. 3 English words rose and fell. Outsider, take, territory. Around midnight, breathing pressed the tent wall. Patient, then hungry, then measured, like the breather checking their own pulse. Twice the fabric pushed in near my shoulder and eased back. I kept still. A little before 2, a new sound began at the vestibule. Scrape, scrape, a tool drawing earth aside, slow and steady. For so long I ran out of guesses for what could be worth that much time. At first light there was a pit right in front of my door, 3 feet by 2, shallow and blunt, the kind of shape that makes your body think grave before your mind can scold it. Inside were a torn strip of fabric, a broken compass, and a trail guide page with a brown stain thumbed where someone had handled it with blood still wet. Packing takes longer when your fingers refuse the idea of zippers. I headed for the road, A mile in, the pursuit dropped its politeness, crashing on both sides at once, whoops that weren't coyotes or owls, calls tossed back and forth like orders or celebration. I ran. Packs hate to run. Knees are bad at it. The noise grew louder and more excited, as if the people making it could see the end of the chase and liked what it meant. A steep ravine. A wooden footbridge. I sprinted onto it and halfway across made the mistake of looking back. The tree line stood up. At least 5 figures, tall and rope-thin, hair matted into heavy ropes, skin dark with dirt, and marked in lines I couldn't name. Their clothing was an argument between animal skin and ruined modern pieces cut into wraps and sleeves. Each carried something that could open a body: club, sharpened stake, stone hafted to wood. They didn't run like we do. They loped, springing forward in a way that ate distance quietly. The whoops climbed a ladder of pitch as they crossed into my side of the ravine. I hit the far end and stayed with forward because the bridge had done enough for me. I was rehearsing what being caught would be like when a noise most people ignore became a miracle. A truck engine somewhere ahead. I crashed out onto gravel as a Forest Service pickup rolled into view. I threw my whole life into a wave. The driver, Ranger Hanley, braked hard enough that the gravel tried to climb into the hood. He saw my face and the mud and blood doing their two-tone work on my clothes, and opened at the door without ceremony. As we pulled away, I looked back. The 5 stood at the edge of the trees like a bad decision on a doorstep. They didn't hide, didn't duck, didn't run. They watched the truck go with a posture that read as anger even from that distance. Their height held wrong against the trunks. Their weapons hung at angles that weren't rest and weren't attack, like patience had been taught to them the hard way. At the station, I told the story in one line, then again with times and distances. The Rangers nodded in that public way departments nod. Hunters, they suggested. Campers protecting a spot. Local kids with more nerve than sense. There were forms, because forms make things real. When Hanley walked me to a sink to wash the blood off, he gave me the part that doesn't make it onto forms. We've had reports, he said. Years of them. Same corridors, plus a couple more. We find shelters tucked where you'd crawl to find them. Tool sites, hanging caches. We follow a foot line and it stops walking. Just ends. He stared at the map on the wall like it might finish the sentence. It's groups, he said finally. They move like groups. They know the hollows. They don't want us speaking about them like groups. He said closures had been floated as persistent safety concerns, but other offices didn't want to stamp the word closed on a map where money had opinions. He told me not to go back. He told me to tell people what I could without making it a dare. I meant to leave the county that afternoon. Instead, I took a cot at the station and tried to make an hour of sleep from a pillow that had quit a decade ago. I woke before dawn to tires under me and thought about driving until my hands remembered paint lines. If I don't make it out, keep the sequence. Prints circling a site, night voices at distance, the parallel shadow in daylight that proves a person can move through forest without touching it. Camp with my back to water, closer voices, clicks, breathing on the tent, fabric pressing, slow scrape of earth, pit with other people's scraps, pursuit that stops pretending and whoops like joy. The bridge, the 5, the truck, the station, the quiet part a ranger says between his job and his paycheck. Search and rescue recovered these pages 3 days later under an overhang a little more than a mile northeast of the Hubbard Creek footbridge. The weather had been kind, visibility good. My car sat locked at the trailhead. Teams with dogs and a helicopter found concealed bow shelters, hanging caches, arranged stone and stick markers, 3 shortcuts paired with a forked notch carved into bark, bare soft wrapped prints with odd wear. No body. A scuff on a slope and a torn strap from a pack like mine. The journal went into evidence. The area stayed open. If there's no body with these pages, know this as well as you know your own name. I was hunted. They don't speak to you. They speak about you. Clicks for agreements, low words almost meaning turned smooth before you can own them. They take positions where crossing is thin, bridges, ravines, road edges. They like circles, around your tent, around your choices, around the part of your head that thinks reason changes anything. If you hear whispering from more than one direction, and breath presses the nylon, and the ground by your vestibule scrapes like a shovel with no metal on it, leave. Don't argue with pride. Don't tidy your camp for strangers you hope will respect it. Don't wait to see if the voices get friendlier. Walk until your feet remember gravel and someone painted a line for you. Don't look back at the trees from the road. If they're there, they don't want your eyes. And if they aren't, you don't need to invent them. Tell my mother I kept moving. Tell my father it wasn't exposure and it wasn't a stumble. Tell whoever comes after me that the markers mean something to someone and that someone doesn't want you to understand, only to obey. The scratching is close again. Not one hole this time, several in a tidy grid. The voices don't whisper now. They call to each other and there is gladness in the call because I am the reason for it. If you see white at the trees, it isn't fog. If you hear the click, you are already late. My name is Dr. Leaf Caro. I've spent 15 years keeping people alive after knives, bullets, and cars insist they shouldn't be. I've seen chaos in fluorescent light. What I hadn't seen, what I didn't know how to think about, was what happened in the Ozark Highlands the week of May 8-13, 2019. I volunteer with a veterans group on weekends. That's where I met Efrain Finn Cuellar, 43, 3 tours in Iraq, Oklahoma born. Hiking long distances was how he kept the noise down. Miles are medicine, he told me. That spring, we planned a 6-day, 70-mile section through the Buffalo National River Corridor, start near Ponca, finish at a pullout off Highway 21. My wife would meet us there. The first 3 days were mild and clean. Flocks in the drains, limestone ribs, cedar giving off a dry green smell. Finn was light in his voice. Talked about a niece in Tulsa, a line cook job he might try, finishing a longer trail in sections. Sometimes we didn't speak for an hour, just walked, the quiet doing work. On day 4, we were eating by a low creek when a man stepped into our space like he'd been invited. He didn't introduce himself. He crouched near our food and started talking in one long ribbon. Phones are trackers, licenses have chips, churches recruit for agencies. He said people in the hollows were watching us, that the family had eyes we couldn't see. His clothes were beyond trail dirty, a layered crust like sleeping in grease and waking in a ditch. His eyes didn't settle on anything for long, except our food. I learned his name later, Avery Pike. Finn offered him trail mix. Avery grabbed fast and looked for more. We shouldered our packs to move on. He said he'd stack eyes with us since we were headed the same way. He followed at roughly 50 yards, dropping lines loud enough for us to hear. IMI pings, not just SIM. They hide antennas in fire towers, TODs, splice names and credit reports. I thought about psychosis, about meth, about both. Out there, diagnoses don't matter as much as volatility. We chose a ridgetop site near Whitaker Point. Locals call it Hawksbill. Good breeze, bugs lower, a rock step to break the wind. A young Canadian couple, Maëlle and Arlo, had a small flat around the bend. An older Missourian who called himself Gus Mallory boiled dinner in dented aluminum and tried not to be involved. At dusk, Avery reappeared carrying a battered acoustic guitar. He set a token camp 100 yards away and began playing. It wasn't a song. A string was missing. The drone was broken by frantic notes and mutters. The words came into focus. Invisible enemies, contacts, codes, permission. Maëlle came over quietly. He followed me for hours 3 days ago, she said. Said my pack had a tracker sewn in. I lost him when I met up with Arlo at a shelter. Gus said without looking up, I don't argue with men whose eyes don't blink right. I just walk. We ate and made a plan. If Avery pushed in, we'd leave the tents, sleep in our boots a quarter mile down the ridge. Trade comfort for not being burned by a stranger at midnight. Night dropped fast. For a minute, the guitar stopped, and I let myself think we'd sleep. Then Avery stood in our firelight, a 5-inch clip point in hand. "Show me your identification," he said. "Not the chipped ones, the clean ones." His face was set and wild at once. Finn stood. He lifted both hands, elbows loose, palms out. Military training hides in joints like that. "We're weekend nobodies," he said, voice even. "We can break camp. You can take the food. No one's tracking you." Avery's expression softened for a blink, then hardened. "The family cleared this ground," he said. "They said you're not clean. They said you came for me." The air changed. The way a room shifts when a fight is inevitable. Avery stepped and Finn gave him space. The knife still found him. The first cut wasn't deep. The second was, under the rib, a quick angled thrust. In the OR, you get time you buy back with tools and blood. On a ridge, you get what the knife gives you. I heard the sound of air leaving Finn like a paper bag crushed in a fist. "I want to tell you I ran at Avery. I didn't. When the blade lifted toward me, I flinched and ran. Into cedar that combed my sleeves. Onto limestone under needles that wanted to twist ankles. Behind me, Mael cried out, and there were the sounds of a body hitting things that don't give and someone trying to get back up. Avery's voice rose over it in incoherent triumph. And then I heard something that didn't belong. A low whistle answered by a click from farther right. Not birds, not something I'd heard before in any forest. It came again, a click sequence, then a whisper of English. I found a pocket in broken rock, a place a body can hide by becoming edges. I lay on my belly and listened. There were multiple voices now. Avery, loud and manic. Others, calm, low, certain. They used English to pass nouns and instructions and then fell back to that clicking code. I heard enough to understand the shape of what was happening. "Check the seams," someone said. "Prints on the hard ground. Fuel. Cereals. Blue tags clean." "Yes," answered in clicks. They were stripping the site like a crew after last call, deciding what to take, what to ditch, how to erase. They spoke with the efficiency of people who have done a job before, who divide tasks without saying names. I lay still until the dark softened at the edges and the voices moved off into a hollow like people walking home. When I stood, my teeth hit each other wrong. I went back to camp because the only other choice was run to the high W's and never look. The fire was gray. Finn lay on his side, like he tried not to die on his back. I knelt and did what muscle memory demands. I failed. I won't narrate the attempts. They don't change the ending. Mael was gone. Arlo was gone. Gus was gone. Our gear was not gone. It had been sorted. My bag lay open on my ground sheet with half of it replaced. Stove fuel missing, spare headlamp missing, knife missing. Socks neatly rolled and left like a courtesy. It looked like work done by people who care about speed and quiet, not mess. I walked roughly 6 miles to the road and waved down a trucker who didn't ask questions. Deputies and a ranger met me and followed back. In daylight, with numbers and authority, the ridge felt smaller. They found Avery a mile from camp, sitting by a creek with blood on his shirt and Finn's knife on the ground. He didn't run. He said he'd defended himself against federal agents. He asked for a cigarette. They took him into custody. They searched the ridge, the hollow, the side cuts, anywhere people disappear to if they know the land. They found no one else, no prints anyone would swear to, no gas can, no hidden camp, no second sight. When I said I'd heard multiple voices, one deputy nodded the way you nod to grief. The ranger asked me to describe the sounds and said, "Whip poor wills can trick a man." I told him these were not birds. He didn't argue. He just didn't agree. 3 months later, in August, 2 hunters found Mael in a ravine about 10 miles from our campsite. The medical examiner wrote homicide but couldn't say how. Heat and animals had stripped away the precise story. The report included a buried sentence. The body had likely been moved. Her gear was never recovered. No tent, no bag, no fixed blade she wore at her hip. Camps get ransacked by the angry and the desperate. This had the feel of people who extract value, clear it, and up and leave. Avery's trial dragged nearly 2 years. Hikers testified about him, how he'd followed them, how he'd talked about the family, how he seemed to know unmarked caves and old homestead traces like he carried a map no one sold. A ranger said there were off-ridge residents in the forest, seen a few times a year, bedding deep in cedar, the smoke of a small cook fire where there shouldn't be one. Mostly shy, he said. Sometimes not. The prosecution steered away from that. They focused on psychosis and a clear narrative. A lone, delusional drifter did a terrible thing. The verdict was not guilty by reason of insanity. Avery went to a psychiatric facility. The file closed with the assumption he'd acted alone. I understand why systems prefer a single culprit. It's narratively neat. It lets hikers hike. It lets line items stay flat. But I didn't just hear a man in an episode that night. I heard division of labor. I heard nouns that belong to logistics, fuel, seams, cereals, prints. I heard approval and confirmation in clicks instead of yes. I heard people, plural, cleaning a site and vanishing along routes they trust. I've not been back to those ridges. I tell myself it's because my work is here, because my wife asked me not to. The truth is also that there are places where the map is not the territory, and the territory has rules you don't get to vote on. I run hospital stairs before sunrise and drink coffee on a flat roof and try to believe light can explain everything. Sometimes it does. I think about Finn when I do. The way he lifted his hands, open, empty, a man giving calm back to a situation that didn't want it. I think about Mael, who warned us in a whisper, and the way warnings get dismissed when there's no paperwork to pin them to. I think about the ranger who said off-ridge like a word that isn't supposed to be written down. If you're going out there, and people was, son, you'll know this. Ozark rock keeps hollows where sound travels wrong. Cedar eats footprints. Karst hides steps like it's paid to. There are families in those hills. Some the way we mean it at a table, some the other way. Loyalty to place and method more than to law. Most won't want anything from you. Some will. They are organized enough to strip a camp, move a body, and leave without a story to follow. If you hear clicking, low, deliberate, answered from more than one direction, leave. Don't wait for a second sample. Don't repack. Don't go looking for the logic that will make you feel better. Walk. Find water. Follow it until it hits a road. Stand where there are lines someone painted and call for help. Don't come back with friends to check. Don't make a second story. They'll tell you the world is safer than it is because breakfast is easier that way. They'll say only sick men do sick things and the rest of us are fine. They'll say I ran when I should have fought. They're right about that part. I ran. I run still in my sleep and in the 2 seconds after a clamp goes on and the heart decides whether to listen. I don't have an answer that makes that noble. I am a surgeon. I know the difference between wounds made by one set of hands and scenes cleaned by a crew. The ridge that night was crew work. The difference has a sound. It begins with a whistle, ends with a click, and says we are here without using words. If you ever hear it, let that be the only explanation you need. Leave the ridge. Go. My name is Elon Park, and I shoot wild places for a living. I'm based in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and in September of 2019, I took one of those assignments that feel like a gift. A week in the mountains to chase color as it first touches the crowns of sugar maple and birch. My partner on the project was Perrin Holt, a Vermonter who could read a topo map like sheet music. We meant to build a coffee table book out of early fall in the Adirondack High Peaks wilderness. Clean, unposed images you could still smell if you pressed your face to the paper. Perrin handled the lines on the ground, rotes, water, where the land would turn rude after rain. I carried the cameras, extra batteries, and the unwritten hope that light would behave. For 3 days, it did. The air was crisp enough to make every exhale feel deserved. We moved on marked trails, stayed at designated sites, and slept the kind of sleep that only comes when night has a river in it. I shot audible water graining itself to silk, Noonmark holding the last light like a bowl, and a red maple that had sprinted ahead of its neighbors as if called. On day 4, near Keene Valley, we reached a tangle of side trails that thread out towards scenic perches. Indian Head to the east, old logging grades to the north. Split for a few hours? Perrin asked. You work the overlooks. I'll follow one of these tramway traces and see if there's anything left to tell a story with. We had GPS units, whistles, phones that only bothered with service on ridges, and a rendezvous plan. Meet at our site off the east branch of the Ausable by evening. The kind of plan that makes sense to people who have never been punished for trusting it. I reached the overlook near noon and forgot everything except the job. The valley ran like a green river below, fir and spruce in velvet rows, rock faces shoulder bared. The light did that perfect septum. Burr thing where it feels both new and old, sharp edges without the cruelty of July. I worked a long lens, and then a wide one, and then a tripod to catch the water leaving a beaver dam, like a girl lifting the hem of her dress. When the light bent toward 4 and the shadows went blue, I realized I'd wandered off the blazed spur and kept walking, as if the forest had agreed to be simple. My GPS placed me nearly a mile south of where my feet insisted I stood. The screen showed my pulsing dot in the middle of a lake that did not exist. I tried to backtrack by landmark and found that the land had stopped lending me marks. I was moving in careful circles. Pick a tree, walk to it, look back, when I heard Perrin call my name. Elin! Relief rose so fast I didn't test it. I'm here, I shouted and turned toward the sound. It came again, thinner, from the left. Then, behind me, always just far enough that a person could imagine closing the distance in 5 minutes, then 10, then an hour. I followed his voice for nearly 60 minutes, through blowdown and over moss that unstitched under my boots, chasing volume and direction until both felt like tricks. By the time the sun found the angle where it stops negotiating with understory, I knew I was lost, and something in the timber knew I knew. The first undeniable sign wasn't a sound, it was a shelter. Hidden in a knot of fir, camouflaged with boughs and strips of cloth, it wouldn't have been visible from 10 feet away if I hadn't stepped into its breath. Inside, a fire pit warm enough to blur the air above it, crude tools, sticks shaved to points, stones worried into edges, piles of bones split for marrow. And among those things, a scatter of hiker life, a torn piece of nylon, a buckle free of its strap, a page from a trail guide with the corners thumbed black. I backed out on the same holes my feet had made going in. No bars on my phone. The GPS still stubborn about its imaginary lake. The light almost gone. That's when I heard Perrin again. Only it wasn't right. He wasn't calling to me. He was talking to someone else, voice tight and careful, the way you talk when you think the right tone can turn strangers into help. I don't understand what you want, he said, or something like it. Please, I have to go back and find her. I moved toward the sound with my camera in my hands, because a camera gives you the lie that seeing is control. 20 minutes later, a flicker found the trees ahead. Firelight, low and active. I dropped behind a big oak, breath in the wrong part of my throat, heart too loud for any plan that included silence. In the clearing, Perrin sat on the ground near a small fire, hands where someone else had told him to put them. Around him stood 4 figures. They wore animal skins layered with torn modern clothes reworked into arm wraps and skirts. Their hair hung in ropes. Their skin carried scars and ink and soot-bloomed handprints. They moved like the clearing was theirs and Perrin was a problem to be inventoried. They didn't speak in voices. They clicked at one another, tongue against teeth, a kind of punctuation, then dropped a few guttural syllables that sounded like words rolling around inside a throat that didn't want to give them up. When Perrin spoke, they didn't answer him. They circled, reached out to touch his jacket, the strap of his pack, the watch band on his wrist like children in a museum without a docent. He did what calm men do, explained, promised, asked nothing he couldn't repay. I thought, photos, evidence, if I couldn't be help. I raised the camera, braced against bark, and fired a burst. The flash blew the clearing flat. All four heads turned at once, and the world held very still. One of them pointed directly at me. The clicks came fast, like agreement or alarm. The circle opened into a line, a shape meant to tear through trees. I ran. There were branches. There were roots. There were things my ankles do not forgive. Behind me, someone ran without making any of the sounds I was making. Another to my right, another to my left. For a while I could hear Perrin, my name in his mouth, then just the sound a person makes when they are running out of air and options. After that, only the forest's version of speed, the hiss of needles, a foot placed with absolute love of earth, the tiny click that says, go. I hit a stream by accident and made the accident the plan. Water downhill becomes water where roads are, someone once told me. I walked in the bed when it ran slick rock, and beside it when it dug into mud, and I kept moving until black became gray. A trio of hunters found me on a 2-track at dawn, orange vests, loud as forgiveness. They gave me a direction, and 6 miles later I had service. Dispatch made promises a voice at a counter cannot keep, and which must be made anyway. Within hours there were K9s and a helicopter and volunteers in hats that said they needed to be there. The teams found our camp by the East Branch and Perrin's pack. Some gear scattered like someone had shaken it and then gotten bored. They found shelters like the one I'd stepped into, hidden in folds of land the maps pretend are flat. They found a network, thin, used trails linking those places as if a grid existed under the green and we were too new to read it. They found tracks that were human and wrong at once, prints without tread, the wear patterns of soft wrapped feet. They did not find Perrin. After a week, the official search ended. Someone wrote missing person on a line in a report. Someone else suggested the river, though there was no reason to marry Perrin to water except that water explained a kind of vanishing they could list in a press release. I hired private teams with maps of their own and money that felt like trying to set broken things with string. We found more shelters. We found tool-making places where stone and bone both had stories to tell. We found food caches, dried meat, jars of gathered plants, a shelf where the bark was worn smooth by hands that put and took with purpose. We found markers, sticks and stones arranged with a grammar my brain recognized without translation. The markers repeated at intervals along the thin trails we hadn't known to look for. Boundaries, or invitations you'd only understand if you weren't me. 8 months later, turkey hunters moving through scrubs south of Panther Gorge found remains, badly decomposed, scattered by animals, clothing rags worked into the ground by weather. Dental records, said Perrin. The medical examiner wrote undetermined. There were fractures and scoring that could have happened before or after death, depending on what story you needed to tell. The report didn't mention the shelters or the caches or the markers or the network of trails running like a second circulatory system beneath the official one. Reports don't do well with the parts of the world that don't want to be reports. I've been asked if maybe I was exhausted, if my GPS glitch primed me to see patterns, if the flash from my camera made my brain paste meaning onto silhouettes in the dark. I'm a photographer. I know what lenses do to truth. I also know what I saw. 4 people stood around my partner and talked about him without using words I could share. They tracked me through a forest in sync, in conversation made of clicks and movement as if they were a hand and I was a thing to be grasped. They've been out there longer than our maps. Their families are not like ours, but they are families. They are organized and territorial and as intelligent as you'd expect people to be when the price of a mistake is dying somewhere only you know. Don't tell me it was legend. Legends don't leave warm ashes and the smell of marrow fat on cracked bone. Legends don't split a spruce root into cordage and tie a cache into a fork with a knot any climber would respect. I haven't gone back. I won't. When people ask me for advice, photographers, hikers, anyone with more ambition than sense, I give them what I allowed myself too late. If you hear your partner's voice from two directions at once, you're being led. If a shelter appears only when you're close enough to smell it, you're where someone lives. If the night drops not to silence but to listening, if a click answers a click from more than one place, if you feel the grammar of a boundary without seeing a sign, you are not on your trail anymore. You are on theirs. Perrin died because we underestimated a danger with a human face. Not a bear, not a snake. A group that thinks in terms of territory and use. I used to believe the worst that could happen out there was weather you hadn't prepared for, or a turned ankle where rescue takes too long. Those can end you, sure. So can people who refused the rest of us long ago, and have since gotten very good at making sure our absence remains the rule. I can still hear him sometimes when I'm working, that wrong version of his voice braided with others, threaded with that impossible calm he carried even into the dark. I keep one of his photos on my desk. A simple frame of a brook running over beaver-gnawed sticks, light thinning toward evening. It reminds me that the world keeps doing its work whether or not we recognize the shape of it. It reminds me that none of us own these places, not even on paper. If you go, go. But know that there are second maps laid over the first. Know that they're written in cuts on bark, bundles hung high, and sounds you can't put in a guidebook. If you feel them under your feet, if the forest begins to talk to itself in clicks, leave the spur, leave the view, leave the plan where it stands. Follow water until it gives you a road. Don't go back to show anyone where. Don't go back at all. My name is Nico Harrow, a wildlife photographer out of Asheville. What I saw in the high country of the Rhone Highlands in November 2021 has worked on me like slow poison. If the images they took from me never see daylight, these words will have to do. I'd planned 5 days up near Rhone High Knob and Grassy Ridge, chasing that early winter light that turns spruce crowns to pewter and lays frost like lace over the balds. I pulled a backcountry permit, checked weather, clear days in the 40s, 20s at night, perfect, and hiked out from Carver's Gap on November 8th, dropping off the Appalachian Trail onto lesser-used lines to earn distance from the crowds. 10 grand of glass and bodies in my pack, 5 days of food, winter kit tight and trimmed. 2 days went like a grant proposal come true. Bears working the last of the season, a red fox braided into juniper shadow, rime on grasses that made every step a photograph if you let it. No hikers. The mountain was an emptied room that still held heat from a party a week old. On day 3, November 10th, I left trail altogether, contouring into a remote pocket valley I'd picked off the topo, a narrow trough with a creek stitching its bottom and the kind of north aspect that keeps color longer. The push took 2 hours. Spruce thickets, steep duff that slid like ball bearings, and the reward was exactly what I'd hoped. A low sun folding through bare beech limbs onto a leaf carpet so perfect, it felt curated. I worked until noon, long lens for a buck ghosting through fur, wide for the creek turning itself to silk, and then broke down the tripod to chase the next angle. That's when I noticed the prints. Human. Barefoot or soft-wrapped. No tread. Large. Larger than mine by an inch, maybe more. They followed the creek deeper into timber no ranger would send a novice. Curiosity is the cost of my job. I paid it. I told myself I'd found a stow, or off-grid living, rough sleepers, something adjacent to the human condition that wouldn't fit on a billboard but might matter on paper. The prince pulled me a mile farther under a canopy so dense the noon sky went to twilight. The air changed there, colder, quieter, like a door had been shut behind me. In a stand of old hemlock I found them. Not tents, not tarps, a village. A dozen crude shelters, bough huts skinned with bark, stitched with sapling ribs, patched with hide and scraps of modern cloth. They ringed a central space where fire pits pocked the ground and butcher stones were stained a brown that wasn't all iron. Around the ring, markers, skulls and long bones arranged with deliberation, set on poles or nested in latticework of sticks like words written in a grammar I didn't want to translate. Some bone was new enough to keep shape. Some had weathered into the gray of old teeth. I raised the camera because that's what I am when I'm brave or stupid or both. I shot the circle, the shelters, the arrangements. That's when the woods moved. Soft at first, understory adjusting itself, then systemic, several bodies stepping through laurel in a pattern more like herding than chase. I slung the tripod and ran. The valley tried to take me back. Blowdowns knee-high, deadfall shoulder-high, ravines that made a map inside your thighs and insisted you follow it. Behind me, a whistle trilled, answered by another farther left. Then a call, 2 notes, the second rising. A signal, not panic, coordination. 30 minutes like that and the trees fell away into a small clearing where wind had an opinion. I risked a look. There were 5 of them, tall and wire-thin, hair matted into ropes, skin cross-hatched with scars and daubed with black like war paint. Clothing was an argument between the past and the dump, animal hide layered with torn modern, jacket sleeves repurposed as shin wraps, fleece cut into skirts and hoods. Their weapons made my mouth go dry. A mix. One carried a short rifle near enough to hunting stock to be modified, another a handgun tucked in cloth. The others held spears, bows, knives hafted to sticks with fiber cordage. They moved like people who had practiced moving together until it stopped being practice. I pushed hard for the ridge and hit the AT like a lifeline. 2 day hikers from Georgia on a leaf peep loop stepped into my life at exactly the point where lives step out. They saw the blood, the ripped sleeve, the eyes you can't fix with trail mix. They turned around without being asked. At Carver's Gap, I went straight to the Rangers. They gave me the skeptical that lives under all bureaucracies until you tip it over. Then I showed them the shots on my LCD. Shelters, bone lattices, a boundary built from human remains, and the temperature in the room changed. A truck became a convoy. Green uniforms became plainclothes with clipped questions and clipped hair. Helicopters found the habit of the sky over that valley. I was told, politely, that I was now cooperating in an ongoing investigation and that I should not talk to anyone. A week later, the mountain exhaled, and so did the operation. The official line: I had found remains of a 19th century settlement, and the bone arrangements reflected traditional burial practices disturbed by erosion and animal activity. No evidence of recent habitation, no criminal activity detected. Thank you for your concern. I am not an archaeologist. I know what a zip tie looks like. I know the blue-gray scab a plastic bucket leaves on a trunk. I know fresh power and a cord from old vine, and the cut marks a modern blade leaves when you're done arguing about it. Those were in my frames. Modern as the rifle I saw and the click I heard between 2 men who didn't need words to plan. I asked for my cards back. They were evidence, I was told, part of a study. I'd have copies when the research concluded. I never did. Instead, I got phone calls from numbers that wouldn't identify themselves, voices that knew where I shot and when, who I owed and why, names that only my accountant should know. I got inspections and audits that cost me time and clients and the patience of people who'd once liked me. I got a feeling in my back teeth that we only have names for in other languages, watched, measured, put on a list. 3 times I saw them. Not the same men, maybe, but the same body held in the same way. Once across the street from my apartment, close enough that the hairs on my arms stood up. Once in the parking lot of a chute, leaning on the cowl of a sedan that had the blank look of government. Once at the Blue Ridge Parkway, overlook where I had learned to love fog like a personality. They didn't wave, they didn't hide. They made sure my brain drew lines between then and now. 6 months in, I sold the business and left. Colorado took me in. An office, a desk, a plant that doesn't need much sun. I stopped sleeping near things that can clap. Belief is a muscle. Mine got tired. It didn't break. I know what I found in that hemlock bowl was not a page from a museum. I know the village had a schedule. I know I interrupted it. I know I was chased by organized men who were both primitive and modern where it counted. I know a cover when I'm underneath one and the weight of it starts to feel like weather. Since then, other photographers, hikers, and one search and rescue volunteer have reached out like people cup a match, carefully, ready to snuff it if wind comes. They describe the same template in other parks. Evidence of encampments tucked into terrain like it was built to hide them. Pursuits conducted with signals and rolls. Official investigations that end in explanations that ask for trust, but don't earn it. In the same Roan backcountry, and farther south in Balsam and Nantahala, there are disappearances that never found their way to an ending a family could hold. We write exposure on those. Falls. Bear. It is not disrespectful to say, maybe some of those names were taken. Tourism does not enjoy the word closure stamped across a map. Departments do not enjoy out-of-season panic. Budgets do not enjoy the way fear behaves in a county with a short tax base. I understand incentives. I also understand danger when it shows its work. I don't camp now. I still love the look of a dawn that pretends it's shy and isn't. But I've traded the back of the beyond for a window that can be locked. When people ask if the high country is safe, I tell them it's honest. Honesty isn't comfort. The mountain tells you exactly what it is. We are the ones who insist there's only one map. If you go, and I'm not telling you not to, go with the understanding that there are places inside places. The printed trail and the human trail. The ranger station's advice and the grammar of caches hung high. Cordage rubbed smooth by hands. Quiet that is not peace, but decision. If the woods begin to listen to themselves, leave. If 2 notes rise in answer to one, leave faster. If you step into a circle of shelters and a boundary speaks in bone, you do not need another photograph. They took my images. They did not take the fact of them. I can still see the bone in the lattice, the paracord cinch, bright ag, ain't bark, the way the hemlock boughs had been cut clean and stacked with logic. I can still hear a click that wasn't a branch and a call that wasn't a bird. Those are the kinds of truth that fit in your pocket even when you have to empty your bag. My name is Quinn Aldridge, and I make a living reading the past in rock. I thought that meant I understood slow danger, the kind that takes 1,000 years to gather and 1 second to let go. In August of 2020, the danger was faster, and it had a face. Sable Noor and I had been together 3 years, weekends stolen around night shifts at her clinic, my field work, and the small chores you pretend are romance when you can't get out of town. We picked the Eagle Rock Loop in the Ouachita National Forest for our first real backcountry. 5 days, 40 or so miles, fords across the Little Missouri, red cyanide underfoot, dragonflies threading the heat. Sable was newer to backpacking, but not new to stubbornness. If I can restrain a healer with a fever, she said, I can carry a pack. 2 days went like a brochure. Clear water over blue stone. Camps on sandbars where the river stitched itself into a thin white hem at night. Sable kept stopping to photograph leaves I'd have crushed without noticing. Frog eggs glued like pearls to sticks. A spider that had made a trapdoor in the sand and stared up like an opinion. On the 3rd afternoon, deep in a hollow folks called Viles Branch, though the map had other ideas, the sound changed. Birds shut down. Insects braided their hour into silence. The creek sounded louder, not because it was, but because everything else withdrew. Sable noticed first. She didn't like to say fear out loud. "It's off," she said. We heard footsteps after dark, not approaching, circling. More than one set, never crashing, never careless. Human weight, human cadence, moving counterclockwise around our tent. Twice the ring widened and tightened as if we were a piece to be measured. Sometimes whispers came with it, not quite voices, more like air pushed between teeth and patterns. A word now and then, outsider, take, rose into clarity and sank. I told Sable what? That people tell at midnight when saying it makes you both feel better. Probably hunters, probably lost, probably teenagers with headlamps and bad judgment. She touched the bear spray and said, "Or not." We moved the important things into the tent. We turned off our lamps and listened with a kind of loyalty to our own fear. At 1 a.m, the ring stopped. The silence after sound is a new sound. Sable's fingers crushed mine. Somewhere near the vestibule, a person breathed. Not the soft, unconscious pull of sleep, intentional breath, close enough for condensation if nylon did that. The breath moved along the tent wall, and with it came a sniffing. A dog's inventory had it been a dog. This wasn't a dog. Sable looked at me and shook her head when I reached for light. The silhouette of a crouched figure blocked the seam where moon should have licked the ground. The figure didn't dart or test. It listened to our stillness and then dragged something, nails or a thin tool, down the fly in 3 slow lines. The second pass caught on a guy line and twanged. The third pressed harder, as if assessing resistance. I don't know when I decided to move. The decision stood up and pulled my body with it. I unzipped, yelled without words, and took the tent door with me into the hollow air. My headlamp flattened the world. 5 people stood in a rough circle around the tent. They wore hides, stitched with ruined pieces of modern clothing. A jacket collar turned into a belt, a sleeve cut to wrap a calf. Their hair hung in ropes. Their skin showed scars and smears and lines I didn't have the training to name. Their eyes caught the beam the way a deer's sometimes will, reflective plates turning attention into shine. For a second I thought light would scare them because light has rules, and then I remembered. These people lived outside rules that asked to be respected. They didn't startle, they stared. Then the tallest, scars mapping his arms and face, made a string of clicks with his tongue and teeth, and the other 4 shifted a step in a pattern like a practiced drill. The circle tightened. "Run to the creek," I said, and Sable didn't argue. I held the bear spray at chest height and swept the nearest figure. He recoiled, face away, but he didn't scream and he didn't drop. He backed and then came on again. Sable reached the water first, dark flat stone under blacker current, and stepped into what looked knee-deep and wasn't. The push took her feet and rolled her. She flailed upward once and shouted something I didn't hear, the water taking it in pieces. I went to follow, and the scarred man came in from behind with a strength that felt practiced, not lucky. He threw me, not far, just enough to bruise the ideas out of my ribs. I slashed without aim and opened a line on his forearm. He grunted, not surprise, annoyance, and another of them stepped in to tag me with a sharpened stick that slid under my shirt and into muscle. Pain came like heat. They didn't fight to kill. They worked me the way kids work a wasp nest with sticks to see how long it takes to fall. They pressed and withdrew, circled, let me stand and knock me down again. Not amateurs, not rage, method. The clicks kept time. Between them came that half voice, words notched into sense and then rubbed smooth before I could own them. At some point I stopped trying to hit the men in front of me and cut toward the edge of the circle, through a gap left when 2 shifted. I ran with a limp and a sound and nothing like a plan. The forest is not kind to men who run blind, but it is kind to men who know which way the land tips. I aimed uphill first because most things tire faster there, and then I aimed toward sound, hunting the wide breadth of a road. They followed almost silently. See, a branch snapped and touched my ear, and the person making it was already past me. The clicks were farther back now, more frequent, and I had the animal sense of a clock running down. I lost my lamp on a snag. Moonlight made the world a low-contrast lie, but it was better than the tunnel. When my breath began to taste like metal, the trees thinned into a place where water runs under ducts, and the ground bled a rectangle. Road. I put a heel on gravel, and then the rest of me followed because momentum is its own faith. A Forest Service pickup rounded the bend like a vacation. I waved with both arms, and the driver braked hard enough to complain. He saw the blood, the mud, the word please written across every part of me, and his face changed from protocol to procedure. He got me into the truck and a radio into his hand. He asked where my partner was. My mouth said creek, and he said which, and I said ours, and he didn't tell me that wasn't a place. I gave them enough landmarks to draw a box. Sayar came with dogs and a helicopter and people who know how to read the ground in ways that don't always admit to being reading. They found our camp clawed open, tent split, gear scattered like a yard sale after a wind. They found footprints, dozens, some bare, some wrapped, the kind that don't register as boots in a trained eye. They found blood on stone and scrapes where something heavy had been dragged and then lifted clear. They did not find the five. The earth where they had moved out held their weight like a secret. 3 days later, they found Sable 2 miles downstream, hung in a raft of broken branches where the river likes to slow. The medical examiner said drowning and then said other things. Pre-immersion injuries, cuts and blunt trauma in patterns that fit multiple assailants with primitive weapons. On paper, that meant what it meant. In me, it never means a nut. Publicly, the investigation talked about illegal encampments, drug users, homeless camps pushed too far into the woods. The ranger who pulled me off the road drove to my motel the night after Sable's body came home and sat in a chair while I sat on the bed edge and told me what he could fit into a short room. Incidents. Years of them. Communities you only find by tripping over their edges, and then the edges move. Camps hidden like burrows. Tool sites with bone and stone both cut for purpose. Caches of dried meat and wild plant stores where no one goes but the people who made them. He didn't say feral. He didn't have to. I haven't been back to the Ouachitas. I don't sleep well if I can hear a creak from the window. I learned a thing about my love for the outdoors. How fast it folds itself small when someone you love is no longer in it. I learned I'm not made for revenge and not made for forgetting. I learned that all the training we bring, bear spray, whistles, the polite phrases we keep ready to talk men down, are language, and language fails when it isn't shared. If you go, go. People will. But understand the sequence because once it starts, you're already late. The sound drop, the ring of footsteps, the whispers you can't place on a mouth. The inspection at your tent wall, breath, sniff, a tool drawn down fabric. If you can explode outward, do it. Make light, make pain, make distance. Aim for a road, even if it means a night of rocks trying to rearrange your ankles. Don't negotiate with the clicks. They're not speaking to you. They're speaking about you. I keep a photo of Sable that I don't deserve. Hair wet from a ford. Hands framing a mushroom like a prize, a smudge of river clay above one eye where a mosquito landed and lost the argument. In the background, you can see the water making its small choices around stones, the way it has for longer than any of us have, walked near it. People ask me what I think happened that night, as if a cleaner story would hurt less. I think we were watched from the minute we entered a map that did not belong to us. I think 5 people executed a plan they'd done before and will do again. I think the forest can keep anything it chooses. The last sound I heard from behind me before the road was a click that felt like a clock hand moving into place. I didn't look back. I don't recommend it. My name is Rowan Cutter, retired homicide out of Pittsburgh. 25 years on the job taught me most varieties of human bad, but not the kind that waits in green places with no addresses. What happened to me and Mara Delisle in October 2022 stripped the city out of my instincts and left something older behind. We met through a 50-plus hiking forum. Mara, 58, a social worker out of Columbus with the stubborn grace of someone who'd beat cancer and kept walking. I'm 62. We picked a civilized challenge. A week across the Catskill Park in New York, joining bits of the Devil's Path to connector trails, camping light, leaf peeping like we meant it. First 3 days were postcard clean. Frost-rimmed mornings, sugar maple shouting itself red, chatty trailheads, huts with names burned into the beams. Day 4. We dropped toward the Esopus Creek above Phoenicia and found last night's rain had muscled the water past what I'd let my knees gamble on. We pushed 2 miles north, tucked the tents in a small hemlock bowl off the marked trail, privacy enough to pretend we'd earned it, 20 yards apart for air and safety both. While I boiled water, I heard voices in the trees, at first just shape, then tone, angry, clipped, too steady for a lover's quarrel. Mara heard it too. We couldn't catch words. We could catch momentum. It was coming closer. Then, like a switch, the woods went silent. Even the creek hushed. We agreed to run watches. I took first, back against a maple with the clearing in my lap and the habit of 100 stakeouts riding my spine. For 2 hours, ordinary night, branch talk, a screech owl. Then a new sound, careful movement, low and slow, mapping a wide circle around our camp. Someone reconning. I reached for my whistle, and a voice came clean out of the dark. "We know you're in there," it said. "We want to talk. Come where we can see you." Male. An accent I could not on. T-place, guttural like a throat with gravel in it, but the words were exact. I woke Mara and told her to stay put until I said otherwise. Training took the wheel. I called out. Name, retired law enforcement, request for identification and purpose. Keep it firm, keep it cool. Give them a path that isn't violence. "We don't care what you used to be," the voice said. "We care what you have and what you know. Answer, and no one gets hurt." This wasn't drunks. It wasn't bored locals. This was targeted. I told Mara, whistle and phone on go. I checked mine. No service where there should have been. "You don't need phones," the voice added, like he could see me. "This is our ground. We decide what happens here." I stepped out, palms open. They came in 4, fanning out of the hemlocks like they'd rehearsed the entrance. Men, long hair, matted, skin marked with scars and dark ink, clothing a patchwork of animal hide and torn modern fabric reworked into wraps. What chilled me wasn't the look, it was the discipline. They moved like a unit. Weapons, a modified hunting rifle on the tall one with the ruined cheek, 2 handguns on the others, plus knives and spears cooked hard in fire. "Sit," the scarred one said, nodding me to a downed log. "You lie. The woman hurts first." I sat, hands visible, eyes on his face, the way you build a bridge with a hostage taker. Mara came out when told, jaw set, hands steady. What followed was an interrogation good enough to make my old instructors take notes. They were convinced we were operatives, feds, state, something sent to map them. "Who sent you? What's your objective? Where's the hardware?" They tore through our kit with a tech's interest. GPS, phones, camera, asking the right-wrong questions about hidden mics, trackers, burst transmission. When our answers didn't stitch to their story, they tagged inconsistency and pushed there. They threatened Mara to move me. It worked, and they knew exactly how much. 3 hours of it, trading roles like a team. Then the questions turned personal. Family, jobs, affiliations. When I owned being a retired detective, the energy changed. The scarred one watched me the way a mechanic watches a part he finally recognizes. He clicked a few cody syllables to the others, English braided with something else, and announced we were going to their camp for longer work by people who handle government. "You stay alive if you help us understand their tactics," he said. He meant ours. That's where the line ended for me. If they moved us, we were gone. I waited for the moment I'd trained my body to see. Rifle pointed away, handgun low, 2 sets of eyes drawn by a question, and went hard at the nearest gun. It bought seconds. I stripped the pistol, shoved it back into its owner, opened another with his own blade. The other 2 smothered the burst. Mara ran. A smaller one cut her legs from under her, and she went down with a sound I don't put verbs to. We should have paid for that. We didn't, at least not the way I'd seen scenes like this end. The scarred one studied me, breathing hard through his nose like he was cooling a temper he respected. "You fight," he said. "That could be useful." They bound our wrists and ankles with plant fiber rope tight as cuffs and argued in low tones. "Take us now. Kill us now. How many? How close?" I caught scouts, track, dawn, in the murmur, a vocabulary of security. Just before first light, voices came from the direction of the main trail. Our 4 snapped into a drill. 2 to intercept, 2 to silence us if we made noise. I braced. What came through the trees was a Boy Scout troop. 3 dozen kids and leaders. Early start hikers with too much whistle and not enough fear. The math changed. 4 against a crowd with phones and parents. The unit leader ran it in his head and chose disappear. Before he ghosted, the scarred man leaned into my ear. "We know you now," he said. "If you speak, it ends. We have people in uniforms." Then they were gone, swallowed by green in a way I'd admire if I hadn't wanted them dead. I chewed the rope at my wrists until the fibers gave, freed Mara, and we packed the minimum a shaking body can carry. We walked straight to the main trail and into a curtain of khaki and concern. The leaders agreed to escort us to County Route 47 without being told the whole truth. Kids were listening. We filed a report with state police. The public-facing response came out of the drawer it always lives in. Probably hunters, probably campers upset about their spot, maybe transients. Our injuries, the wrecked camp, the gear in pieces, duly noted. A younger trooper caught me alone in the hall and said the quiet part. Multiple reports over years of hikers being interrogated by people who live rough. Always brushed as misunderstandings. Rumors about off-grid communities with rules and security protocols. Anytime someone pushed to follow it up, the push died 2 levels up. We didn't finish the route. Mara did months of therapy and still startles at silence. I found out how much of my old job had been faith, not evidence. What haunts me isn't just the night, it's the competence. Those men weren't unstable loners. They were an organization, doctrine, rehearsals, assignments. They knew surveillance vocabulary. They ran an interview. Some of them have worn badges or uniforms or trained with people who do. They live on the land like they were born under it. They keep territory. We weren't unlucky. We were trespass. I spent a career looking at men who thought they were the law. Out there, some people are. For their ground, by their rules, with consequences you won't read in a paper. The map you buy at the ranger station is only the first map. There's a second one laid over it, written in stick piles and cut bark in the calm of men in the dark who already decided how the next 3 hours will go. Don't go looking for them. If you find them, don't talk about it on the trail like a dare. And if voices come out of the hemlock sounding like argument 1 minute and policy the next, leave before they decide what you know. My name is Jasper Klein, a geologist out of Louisville. In August of 2020, I took the kind of trip you convince yourself you've earned. 5 days of backcountry alongside the person you love, miles traded for quiet, phones traded for stars. I have not gone camping since. Rhea Voss, my girlfriend, worked as a veterinary tech in Lexington. She was outdoorsy in the weekend way, not the sleep-on-scree way, but game for the push if I promised waterfalls and dawn light and the smug noodle dinner you only get after walking all day. We picked Pisgah National Forest in western North Carolina, shining rock wilderness folded into Middle Prong, 40-some miles of trail stitched together in a loop that would ferry us past cold creeks and rhododendron tunnels and ridges that stand just to be looked at. The first 2 days were brochure perfect. Trails tight but honest, weather sparkling, the forest working through its August grammar, gnats in the low spots, breeze where the woods open their ribs to sky. Rhea loved the salamanders, the lichen maps, the brief, clear fords that let you rinse the day's heat off your ankles. We made the time we wanted without needing to admit we wanted to impress each other. On day 3, 15 miles from any road you'd bet on, we reached a hollow locals call Sable Branch, a seam of cold water combed with small cobbles and overhung by hemlock. No shelters back there, no sites with ringed fire, just a pretty bend with enough flat for a tent and a bank of laurel that made it feel like a room. The hills on 3 sides pinched the sound of the creek into something like a hush. We ate early, watched a bat test the air above the water, and let the dark arrive. The forest emptied of noise the way a room does when a teacher steps in. Not a normal lull. Crickets switched off. The creek felt too loud because everything else had decided to listen. Rhea said, "Sumped. Hing's off." And I said the thing men say when we want calm to be contagious. "It's just the holler," I told her. "Sound behaves funny in bowls." A stick snapped behind the tent. One clear, clean crack high enough to be human. We froze. Nothing after. "Dear," I said, buying my own comfort back a penny at a time. An hour later, the stick sound returned, closer, repeated from 2 bearings at once. We killed our lights and let our ears be the room. Footsteps, not the rush and scratch of bear or the quick, sharp taps of raccoon. Deliberate weight, controlled. The steps moved in a lazy circle around us, out wider, then in closer, like a compass being set and reset. "People," I whispered. "Probably hunters, or dispersed campers who don't want company." We slid our most important things inside the tent and put knives and bear spray where our hands could find them in the dark. I lifted my phone for a bar I knew wouldn't be there. Nothing. The ring of steps and low voices, not speech I could parse, just guttural threads, continued almost 2 hours. Sometimes only sound, sometimes the faint scrape you get when someone touches bark without wanting to. Once, Rhea squeezed my wrist and pointed. A shadow crouch held still at the foot of the tent. It breathed. At midnight, silence dropped like a lid. For 60 patient minutes we heard nothing, not even the tiny exploratory noises woods make when they think you're asleep. I started to believe we'd been measured and forgiven. At 1, the breathing returned, inches from my ear through the nylon, explored the ridge of our heads, the line of our shoulders. A minute later came a soft, sickening sniffing, the sound of a nose mapping who we were. The breath moved slow along the walls, paused at the vestibule, and something began to scrape the ground there. Slow, rhythmic pulls, soil dragged against a tool that wasn't metal. "Don't," Rhea whispered, aired when my hand moved toward the light. But whatever part of me still believed you can make fear yield by facing it stood up faster than my sense. I exploded out of the tent with the knife in one hand and bear spray in the other, beam of the headlamp hammering the dark into gray. 5 figures stood around our camp in a lax circle. They wore animal skins patched with torn modern cloth, jackets seam-ripped to bind calves, sleeves made into belts and hoods. Their hair matted into ropes and hung over faces scarred and painted with soot. When my light hit their eyes, they flashed like a deer's, tapetum shine that felt wrong on a human face. They did not startle. They just looked at me, then at each other, with a practiced interest, like mechanics ticking through a new machine. The tallest, scars cross-hatching his cheek and forearms, clicked his tongue against his teeth in a short, commanding string. The others shifted together in a way that comes from repetition. The circle tightened. "Run to the creek," I said. Rhea came out behind me and took in the 5, and made the sound you make when a story turns into a room. I swept the nearest figure with spray, He flinched, turned his face, then came on again, angrier. We bolted. Rhea hit the water first, aiming for the opposite bank, because the opposite bank felt like safety. The pool was deeper than we'd read. The current shoved at her knees, then thighs. She lunged and slipped, arms windmilling, and the creek took her, downstream into a thinner black. "Rhea!" I shouted, and went to follow. A hand like a hook grabbed the back of my pack and threw me sideways. The scarred man again, closer now, close enough to smell sweat gone bad. I stabbed blind and opened a wet line along his forearm. He grunted the way you grunt when you're annoyed at furniture. The others moved in turns, not like a frantic mob, but like a practice. Strike, retreat, force me to turn into another's swing. The sticks they'd hardened left blunt pain that gathered without ending. They spoke to each other only, in clicks, which lined up with their steps like a metronome. It is hard to describe being played with. They did not try to finish me. They did not try to make me stop. They made me feel myself being kept at exactly the line their plan wanted. Somewhere in it, a door I don't remember opening let me slip through. A missed step, a half stumble I exaggerated into a dive. A gap when two changed places. I ran. I didn't care that every branch in the county got a piece of me. I didn't care that I could hear them pace me on both sides, light on their feet, like the forest wanted them to go faster. I lost my headlamp when it snagged a laurel branch. Moonlight gave me enough to stop dying and not enough to plan a life. The clicks sounded closer, sharp, urgent, as if a deadline were approaching and they needed to make good on something promised. The trees thinned. I saw the pale chop of a road through trunks and dumped my legs out of myself. A Forest Service truck topped the rise like something my mind would have made up if it could. I waved everything I had left. The driver, uniformed, eyes already adding up the problem, hauled the wheel over and opened the door. I fell in sideways, body kind with the pleasure of a flat seat. "Someone's in the creek," I said. Downstream, she fell. The ranger radioed before he had his mouth open. He looked in the mirrors, then behind us, and his face did that thing you don't learn in training. It listened to what it didn't see. I tried to tell him. He said we'd talk at the station. He said, "You're bleeding." He said both things like the order mattered. Search and rescue spun up fast. Helicopters, canines, volunteers with long, kind faces. At our camp, they found what we left and what was done to it. A torn tent, gear scattered, a ring of prints that weren't boots and weren't anything you could buy. A blood-mapped path that matched my memory too well. They found places where someone had knelt and the ground had been scraped into tidy troughs. They found signs of multiple people moving through the brush with intent. They did not find 5 people. They did not find Rhea. 3 days later, Rhea came back to us in the way rivers give up what they can't keep. 2 miles downstream, tangled in a raft of branches where the water slowed to wonder about itself. The medical examiner said drowning, and also said what my skin already knew: pre-immersion injuries. Cuts and blows that mapped multiple attackers with primitive weapons. It looked like what it was. On paper, they have to say consistent with. I let them. Publicly, the investigation entertained the story people can carry home without changing their minds. Illegal encampments, drug users in the backcountry, a homeless camp turned violent. Privately, the ranger who'd pulled me off the road sat across from me in a break room the size of 2 closets and said the sentences that belong in small rooms. There had been similar incidents. For years, couples chased, solos inspected at their tents, camps stripped, shelters hidden where only crawl space would find them, caches high in forks with cordage that wasn't store-bought, tool sites with bone and stone both worked until they got their way. A pattern of organized people who knew the folds and hollows better than maps do, who moved without being found because moving the way they do turns them into a kind of weather. We use phrases like persistent safety concerns, he said. We float closures. Closures get unfloated. People like their maps to look open. I've been asked why I didn't leave at the first wrong note. I did. I left the life that came before. I left the person who trusted his boots more than the woods. I left the guy who tells his girlfriend it's probably deer because fear is inconvenient. I also stayed too long. I also thought skills were a contract the world had signed with me. Here's what I take too. Obed. If the forest empties all at once, listen like it's telling you whose turn it is. If footsteps keep a ring around your camp, you're not being watched. You're being managed. If breath presses your tent wall and a sniff maps your sleeping body, whoever is outside is not curious. They are writing a list. If something begins to dig beside your vestibule, it is not a prank. It is not a raccoon. We were not random. They do not work random. We were marked because we arrived in their territory and behaved like people, talking, cooking, letting our guard drop at the hour everyone does. They had the practice to make sure we only made the choices they wanted. They had the home field everyone in sports pretends they understand. I can still hear the clicks sometimes when a room goes quiet at night. The way they lined up with steps like beeps in a hospital. When someone asks what they were speaking, I say about us, not to us. That difference matters. I haven't been back. I won't. I miss the smell of balsam and the way a creek sounds when it decides to talk to rocks. I miss Ria's way of making a salamander seem like a miracle. What I don't miss is pretending a danger with a human face is easier to live with than one with teeth. The teeth were there. They just hid behind organization and time and a culture that isn't mine and doesn't want me to learn its rules. If you go, go. If you love it, love it. But when the second map overlays the first, when the trail is still under your feet, but you can feel another trail laid across your back, leave. Follow water out. Do not go back to show anyone. Do not let anyone talk you into finishing the loop. If you hear a click, you're already late. If the woods begin to listen to themselves, they're not listening for something else. They're listening for you. I never thought I'd be the one telling this, but after what happened to my hiking partner, Helena Len Whitford, in the summer of 2013, I can't keep quiet. People will say grief made me imagine things. Maybe they'll say the woods got in my head. But I know what I heard in those fur-dark hollows, and I know what took Len from me. It wasn't exposure, and it wasn't getting lost. Len was 66, a retired nurse from eastern Tennessee, tougher than leather and kinder than most pastors. We'd hiked together 3 years and decided to go big, a long Appalachian push that summer. By July, we were up in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, legs like cables, lungs like bellows. The plan that day was simple. Gentian Pond Shelter to Imp Shelter, then meet her husband, Harold, the next afternoon at US 2 near Gorham. July 22nd started like every good trail day. Instant oats, bad coffee, blue sky you could drink. Len joked her grandchildren would never believe their grandma had walked more than 2,000 miles on purpose. 4 hours in, we stopped by a brook, cold water singing over granite, and she said she'd step into the trees for a bathroom break. We'd done it 100 times. She took her pack. Len was old school about never leaving food alone, and walked maybe 200 feet off trail into balsam and spruce. 10 minutes. 15. I called her name. Wind answered, moving high through the needles. At 20, I went in after her, keeping the trail on my left shoulder like a compass. The forest tightened quick. Fir, hemlock, deadfall that grabbed at your shins. Sunlight became a rumor. I kept calling, louder now, when I heard sounds I still can't name without my stomach flipping. Low whistles, then clicking. Not woodpecker, not squirrel, not anything I knew. The clicks came from more than one direction, spaced like a signal. Call, answer, confirm. I pushed harder, following broken Duffy of where her boots might have pressed. The clicking accelerated, nearer, layered. Then I heard Len's voice, thin, slow, like someone coming out of anesthesia. I don't understand. Where are you taking me? I need to get back to the trail. I crashed toward the sound, branches whipping my face, heart punching my ribs. When I reached the spot, nothing. No Len. No tracks I could trust. The clicking cut off so cleanly the silence felt unnatural, as if the woods were holding their breath. I searched 6 hours, spiraling, marking my path with flagging and bark scrapes like a desperate surveyor, yelling until my throat was raw. Nothing. Dusk came down from the ridges and I made myself go back to the AT and run for help. The response was massive. Volunteers by the dozens, dogs, helicopters, grid searches that combed the same square miles until the moss ought to have memorized our faces. They found nothing in the window that might have saved her. I guided teams for 3 days in the zone where Len walked off. We kept stumbling on things that shouldn't have been there. The first was a shelter woven from limbs and bark, shoved so deep into a fir thicket you had to know exactly where to look. Inside, a fresh fire ring with warm ash, small bones cracked for marrow, and scratches on nearby trunks, paired slashes, crosshatches, markings. The operations lead called it an old hunter's blind. The ash said otherwise. 2 days later we found another, larger structure a mile off. Multiple sleeping hollows, a better roof. All around it, hung in trees like charms, odd trophies, a single boot, frayed pack straps, a torn rain jacket. Blow-ins from storms, someone offered, maybe. The knots on those straps looked recent to me. On my last day with the search teams, it happened again. The clicking. Most people didn't register it or refuse to. I drifted off the line, following the sound the way why. I'll follow a smell you can't place. 10 minutes through clawing underbrush and I stepped to the edge of a small clearing. I saw a circle of rough shelters, low and tight against the earth. Fire pits blacked and ringed, bundles hung high, lashed with cordage I didn't recognize, and people moving between them. They were human, but something in the way they carried themselves was wrong. Torso forward, knees soft, heads tilting like they were listening for answers inside the ground. Their clothes were a hybrid. Bits of hiker's gear cut and re-sewn into tunics, strips of hide and canvas layered for warmth. They communicated in those clicks and guttural sounds, quick and precise, like speech boiled to signals. One of them noticed me and stilled. The rest followed, turning toward me with a shared attention that felt practiced. I stepped back and found the only thing in the world that would snap under my heel, a dry branch, and the crack was a gunshot. They all focused at once. I ran. I told the search lead what I'd seen. He listened like a man humoring a friend whose nerves had frayed. "Stress plays tricks," he said. I let him have that, because the alternative was worse. After 2 weeks, the official search wound down. Harold Whitford refused to stop. He papered towns with flyers, hired 2 PIs, made himself a permanent fixture on local news. I helped where I could. I never told him about the clearing. I didn't know how to ask a man to believe that. In October 2015, forestry workers found Len, 3 miles from where she'd vanished, in a makeshift camp tucked under a tangle of spruce. The report said she'd survived nearly a month, then died of exposure and starvation. They found her journal, her phone, her gear arranged neatly as if she'd been inventorying her life. What the report didn't lean on were the details I heard later, quietly, from a man who'd been first on scene. Multiple footprints around the tent, bare or soft-wrapped, primitive tools left near the fire, signs that someone had ate food and water to that site, at least for a while. The journal had pages torn out. The entries released painted a story anyone could swallow. A hiker, lost, dwindling. The missing pages might have told a different truth. Here's what I believe, and I wish I didn't. Those people I saw took Len. They kept her alive for reasons I can't stand to hold too long in my head. Her end wasn't a quiet slipping away under stars. It was something else, shaped by a rulebook the rest of us don't know exists. Why would no one say so? Because admitting there are organized, feral communities living deep in our public lands would scare people off the very economies that keep these towns breathing. Because once you say it out loud, you have to do something, and no one wants to fight a forest that knows their names. I don't think Len was the first. I don't think she'll be the last. In pockets of the Appalachians, there are people who live on the second map, the one not printed by rangers, moving along tracks you can't see until you're already on them. They watch the places we step off trail. They know how to erase a camp, how to vanish between two breaths. If you're set on hiking alone in the remote sections, especially where the trail skirts deep spruce and old hemlock, do what you like with bears and weather and your stove. But if you hear clicking that calls and answers itself from the trees, if you find shelters woven into thickets, markings cut into bark, leave. Get back to blazes. Don't be brave for a story. The woods will keep it without you. I know what took Helena Whitford. The paper can say what it wants. The mountain knows, and so do I. My name is Calder Miles, and for 15 years the backcountry has been where I arrange my head. I write software for a living. The screen shrinks the world down to rectangles. Trails make it big again. In October 2022, I took 10 days off to walk the Cape Breton Highlands, from Ingonish north and west toward Pleasant Bay, linking the coastal routes with the wind-scoured plateau. I've soloed plenty. The pack weight becomes your pulse. The stove's little hiss becomes your room. I expected wind, cold, the clean ache of miles. I didn't expect the barrens to look back at me. 3 days were perfect, the kind you remember in February. Skies rinsed clear, air in the 60s by noon and 30s at night, frost ghosting the grass at dawn. I made my miles and then some, camping near established sites or on bare rock where the wind kept the mosquitoes honest. The spruce here crouch into tuckamore, branches braided by storms, and the rock swells like the backs of whales. Everything smelled of salt and fir pitch. The ocean was a hush you could hear even when you couldn't see it. On the 4th day, I crossed one of the barrens, a high meadow spread over shallow soil and ancient stone. It was just past noon, sun flat and bright, the wind cutting clean across the plateau. I sat at the edge of the spruce to eat, back to a low boulder that broke the gusts. Halfway through a tortilla with cheese, I looked up and saw 3 figures standing at the tree line about 200 yards off. It's a national park. Seeing people isn't strange. What was wrong was how they stood and what they wore. All 3 faced me square on, motionless, not talking to each other, not shifting weight the way cold people do. Their clothes were white, not puffy jackets or shells, not anything I recognized. Long, pale garments that hung wrong for hiking, like robes cut from sailcloth or hides turned inside out. Even at that distance, their hair looked too long and heavy, like it had never seen a comb. I lifted a hand, not a wave exactly, more of a, "Hey, I'm here," and friendly. They didn't answer. They simply watched. I tried the universal, "Where you from?" nod. Nothing. 10 minutes stretched long in the wind. I decided to walk over, partly out of curiosity, partly because that kind of staring turns a person into a deer, and I didn't want to be a deer. I shouldered my pack and took 3 steps, and at that exact moment, all 3 figures turned together and slipped back into the spruce. Not running, not crashing, just gone, as if the trees had shut after them. I told myself the thing you tell yourself when something is wrong and you're miles from a road. Tricks of light, bright sun, distance flattening detail, people in weird trail costumes doing a photo. I finished lunch too fast, reset my stride, and moved on. Within 20 minutes I saw white again, this time a flash between 2 bowed spruce, well off the trail but pacing me. I kept walking. The white came and went with the rhythm of the terrain, there when the ground sloped, invisible when it lifted. Twice I stopped and cupped my hands to call, "Hey, you all good?" No answer. I told myself I had misseen until, late afternoon, one of them stood no more than 50 yards off, body long and still as a peeled trunk. I could hear something in the undergrowth, not footfalls so much as a rustle that wasn't wind, punctuated by small, deliberate clicks, as if someone were shaping sounds in the mouth and placing them in the air. Dusk on the plateau doesn't fade, it folds. The barrens go from open to ominous in a breath. I had a decision. Keep moving into the dark, where the rock ledges can snap an ankle, or camp with whatever had been keeping pace. The map showed an old lean-to near a low hill nicknamed Whaleback. I pushed for it with the lulled last of the light. The shelter had seen better decades. One corner of the roof was dropped, the ridge log cracked and sagging. Inside, the floor was a mess of old needles and droppings. But it wasn't the condition that turned me around. It was the things scattered around it. Sharpened stick points and chipped stones rubbed into edges. Scraps of clothing cut ragged from larger pieces. Piles of small bones split longwise for marrow, gnawed ends polished. On the surrounding spruce I found carved marks, not letters, not tally slashes, but short, repeatable patterns. 3 notches on one side, a bifurcated cut on the other, variations of the same idea, like a simple writing system made with a knife. I don't spook easily, but I spooked then. I backed out, gave the lean-to a wide berth, and hiked another half-mile to a small clearing where the trees thinned just enough to see movement. I pitched fast, low profile, guy lines tight, vestibule facing a slash of open rock. I ate without cooking. The wind came and went in uneven breaths, and once or twice the sound around me gathered in a way that made the little hairs on my neck stand up, then scattered like it had been distracted. Around midnight, the rustle stopped. Silence is never total out here. The ocean still wrote its slow underline, but the space between sounds widened until the night felt like a held breath. I lay on my pad, knife in one hand under the bag, headlamp loose around my neck, and listened. What came first was a hum. Low. One note sustained by more than one person, like a choir that had not agreed on the exact pitch but had agreed to stay near it. The hum spread from tree to tree until I could tell there were several people out there. It threaded under the wind and over the ocean hush and worked in a medical way on my body. Drowsy. I fought it by naming the gear in my head, by counting breath in a way a therapist taught me once. The hum rose and fell, and in the spaces between I heard whispers. A few English words. Outsider. Take. Territory. Buried in a cadence that wasn't English. Syllables snapping and clicking like beads. The hum stopped. Someone walked around my tent. These were not stealth steps. They were measured, 9 inches apart. Weight set down to be heard. 1 circle became 2. 2 became 3. The person stopped at the vestibule. I could hear breathing through the nylon, too close to be anything but a face. Slow in, quick out, like someone excited or angry or both. Then something scraped lightly down the fly, from the peak to the ground. Fingernails or maybe a thin tool. Testing. The scrape repeated, harder, snagging once on a guy line and letting go. I broke then. I slung on my headlamp, zipped and flung the vestibule wide, and came out low with my knife up. Light flattened the clearing into 2 planes. Silver trunks, black spaces, no one. The only movement was brush shivering where wind should have been any second now, but wasn't. I swept the beam across the duff for prints and saw none. On this kind of ground you don't always get a clear tread, but you get something. A scuff, a crushed leaf. Clean. Too clean. I packed in 4 minutes with the speed born of panic, crammed instead of rolled, left the guy line knots in to save seconds. The headlamp tunneled the dark. I set my feet and walked, poles out like antennae. Within a minute I could feel movement sliding through the trees at my pace. Left, then right, never ahead, never where the beam was. I didn't check. Checking would have turned the walk into a chase, and I knew without thought that the chase would not be mine to win. I walked for 6 hours. The plateau's slope tipped me down toward the coast, where the forest opens here and there and streams run north to the Gulf. Around 5, the sky went from black to gray, and the first birds spoke up as if on a timer. The movement fell away the way it had come, not in steps, but in the slow absences of steps. I reached a public shelter near a ridge above Fishing Cove just as the sun put a coin edge on the horizon. 2 hikers were there, Rodri Vaughn and his teenage son Keir from Prince Edward Island, drinking tea from steel mugs and looking at my face like it had told them everything they needed to know about the night. "Bad one?" Rodri said. "I need to sit down before my legs decide for me," I said, which is not the thing I usually say. I told the story in a simple line. 3 figures in white, shadowing compromised lean-to, midnight hum, the tent, the steps. Rodri's mouth did the skeptical thing I've done to other people and regretted later. Keir tried not to look at me like I was making an excellent ghost story out of fatigue. "Photos," I said, remembering the few times I'd fumbled my phone out along the way. Grainy, off-angle, terrible. But there, in the first, the spruce made bars of shadow and between them a white vertical with the proportion of a human but wrong. Arms too long or else sleeves that extended past hands, draped like hide. In the second, 2 figures together, faces reflective in the flash like animals' eyes, not just red eye, a deep flat shine that made the features feel unmade. Rodri stopped making skeptical mouth. He looked at Keir, and Keir looked back and something passed between them, a piece of local knowledge that lives in a family and rarely leaves. "There are places on the plateau," Rodri said carefully, "where hunters don't go. Folks call them avoidances. Old word. People see white in the trees. They hear sounds. My father would joke about the wild ones and then make a point to fish a different brook." We hiked together to the nearest park office by late morning. The ranger at the desk was the polite kind, the kind you like immediately and don't want to hand trouble to. I was ready for the smile and nod and, "We'll keep an eye out," told it straight anyway. When I held out my phone, his posture changed by a degree small enough to miss. He asked me to email the images, then asked me to wait while he found a supervisor. The supervisor's face did not do anything dramatic. It did the little thing faces do when something you already know returns wearing someone else's words. "We have persistent safety closures in a couple of drainages," he said, the official cadence wrapping the truth like gauze. "Some of them are wildlife related. Some of them are erosion. Some are other concerns. Trail cams pick up things we can't always identify. If you want a different route to Pleasant Bay, we'll mark one up." I took the longer way, avoiding the barrens and their spruce edges, dropping lower into valleys where the wind smelled more of leaf than salt. Even there, on trunks along the lesser-used paths, I saw marks like the ones by the lean-to. 3 cuts on the right, a forked cut on the left, then 3 again. Once I found a bundle of sticks tied with a strip of hide and hung high in a fur like a warning my body understood before my mind did. I left it alone. I left a lot alone. On the 9th day, I came out above Pleasant Bay, the Gulf cold and chopped, the town small as a toy. I sat on a flat rock and drank the last of my water and watched a gannet come down at speed and knife through the surface. I wanted very badly to unknow the white in the trees and the way the tent wall had flexed as someone breathed 6 inches from my face. Back home, the world reassembled into screens and rectangles as if nothing had happened. I wrote up what I could remember. The times, the distances, the way the hum had layered into sleepiness, the clicks that had meant yes. I sent the photos to the ranger and he sent back a short note that said simply, "Received."